Hello, BookTube. I once again had occasion to be in downtown Boston. And I once again wanted to cheer myself up, and the best way to do that was to go a few streets over to the Brattle bookshop. That's a great old used bookstore in the heart of downtown Boston that has 3 floors of reasonably priced books that are double and triple stacked and change all the time. The Brattle is constantly out shopping. They're constantly bringing stuff up from their basement of wonders and pricing it and putting it in the shop, so you never know from one minute to the next what the shelves are going to look like. And in addition to that, that would be good enough to make them a used bookstore worth visiting. But in addition to that, they also have an outdoor sale lot that's full of books, thousands more books for $1, $3, or $5. And this morning, even early, was not inclement. It was not. It was cloudy, but it was not cold, and it was not windy, and it was not rainy. So it was perfect to go out there and just sort of forget the world. That's just what I did. I talked a little with an old regular who was out there at the same time, but then I just went and browsed. I cannot tell you how many times I have done that. How many times I have just walked around those carts outside, communing with those books, those old friends of mine, all those editions and all those formats of all those books over all those years of reading them and writing about them and selling them. And although I don't need any more books, not at all, you've seen 2 huge mail outs just today, I got a bunch of books. I wanted to show them to you. The first books that I want to show you are rather shameless. I hit a vein, and I decided to just indulge myself. And that vein is ancient Temeria. This is the Conan the Barbarian pastiche novels. Now, Conan the Barbarian was created by Robert E. Howard when he was just a wee sprout. He was just a very young man, and he created Conan originally in a story where he's an older man. He's a king whose backside is still barbarian. He sits ill on the throne. He is still a fighting man. He rose from nothing, from an almost anonymous North Country hill barbarian to the kingship of the mightiest nation in his ancient world. And what Howard did after that in writing and dreaming up and then selling Conan stories was to hopscotch around Conan's incredible, illustrious, long career. Sometimes a buccaneer, sometimes a reaver, sometimes a slayer, sometimes a thief, sometimes young, sometimes not so young. And then Robert E. Howard died. Of course, he killed himself. He took his own life, or he might still be alive. And later on, L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter decided to take those stories and work the whole thing into something like a greater sequence, into a fantasy sequence of a type that was, by the time they did it, very popular in the mass market paperback science fiction and fantasy marketplace. So they did books with titles: Conan of Cimmeria, Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Freebooter, Conan of Aquilonia, and they had beautiful covers, and they had lots of supplementary material, usually in each volume, and they introduced a whole generation of people to Conan the Barbarian and made them fall in love. It was impossible to read those books and not love them. And it was much later, it was decades later, that I think it was Ballantine Books, editorial team at Ballantine Books decided to just go at the whole thing all over again, reviving the original conception that let's present these stories in first of all, their completely original form. No lengthenings by other hands, no matter how skillful, no smoothing out of inconsistencies or anything like that. And let's present them in the order in which we got them, whether we hopscotch around Conan's life or not. And those volumes, I wish I could remember. I can't off the top of my head remember if it's Ballantine. I'll try to remember to leave a link to down below so you can see what I'm talking about. But even if you loved the L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter volumes, you're still going to want those new those new trade paperback volumes. They've got tons of spot illustrations by great fantasy artists. But aside from that, they're also a different Conan reading experience. But long before that happened, long before some publisher decided to go and revive that, to just brush off and give us the sort of original look at Conan, long before that, there were the L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter books, and there were movies, and there were TV shows, a cartoon and a live-action TV show, and publishers noticed that, and they tend to bring out books, and so they did. They brought out lots and lots of pastiche novels, and the pastiche novels take most of them take a page from the L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter books by having their titles be Conan the something, Conan the, and then an adjective. And I found a vein of those, and I indulged myself. So the first, you notice also that hardcore hack fantasy and science fiction authors, people who had demonstrated that they could turn around a manuscript in very little time, and that the manuscript would need very little in the way of interference, that it would be essentially finished. Those kinds of writers were thin on the ground 40 years ago. They still are. They always will be. And so you'll notice that names recur in Conan pastiche novels. And the first of those names here is John Maddox Roberts. I have Conan the Marauder and Conan the Bold. These lurid mass market paperback covers. And these are, John Maddox Roberts has written a million books. And one of the series that he's written, aside from these Conan books, I don't know how many Conan books he's written. I didn't actually count what I was looking at. I just made sure that I wasn't getting doubles. That's all. But in addition to these Conan books, he also wrote a series of murder mysteries set in ancient Rome called the SPQR murder series. Just the letters, SPQR. That was the inscription of the Senate and the people of Rome. And they are wonderful. The SPQR novels are wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. They have a publishing story as long as your arm in America. But they are delightful. I don't know if they're in print at the moment. They weren't for a long time. First they came out in mass market paperbacks in America, I think 5 of them. Then they went out of print completely in America, and I used to hear stories about how they were in print and doing just fine elsewhere in the world. And then they came back into print in America in trade paperbacks with numbers on the spine. And I don't know off the top of my head if those are still around, if you can still get those. But the first book in the series is simply called SPQR, and you can probably get it at your library. They are delightful. They are really, really good and genuinely funny. Most of them have genuinely laugh-out-loud funny endings, which you wouldn't expect in a murder mystery or a historical novel. In these, he's just trying his hand at Conan fiction. And then the next name that repeated is Leonard Carpenter. I don't know anything about Leonard Carpenter, but here we have Conan the Savage and Conan the Renegade, where he is leaping a horse over a wall. And this is Leonard Savage. These paperbacks tend not to give you any details about the author. But it doesn't matter to me, because these will be pure candy. These will be pure candy. Like a lot of the cheap mass market murder mysteries that I've been getting, like a lot of Star Trek novels, they'll be pure candy. And I have, in the last 8-9 months, I have been reacquainted with the very vital part that is played in any reader's life by pure candy. Now, it would be bad in this metaphor, as it would be in real life, if pure candy was all that you ate. And with that point in mind, you can cue up my rant about adults who read nothing but YA. If candy is all that you read, then you're going to harm yourself, just like it would be if candy were all that you ate. But as you already know, that's not true. I just finished wading through a 1,200-page book on philosophy, for Pete's sake. Candy is not all that I read. It shouldn't be all that you read either. But it has its place. It very much has its place. So, and then the next author, we have 2 here by Roland Green. We have Conan the Relentless. Here he's facing a giant octopus. And Conan and the Gods of the Mountain. So there's one that doesn't have just a Conan and an adjective. And I don't know this author at all, so I have no idea what to expect. I'll probably pick one of the ones where a Leonard Carpenter or a Roland Green first. I'm curious to know, of course, with an author whose work I know from elsewhere, what their Conan novel would be like. But I'm a little bit more curious to know about an author about whom I know nothing. And then the last batch, I got all these Conan books. I'll show them to you all in one. The last batch of Conan novels is by an author you're going to know. These are Robert Jordan. This is Conan the Unconquered, Conan the Victorious. Look at that thing. It's got all kinds of swords. And Conan the Magnificent with a Rowena cover. Is that right? No, it's a Boris Vallejo cover. That's a very nice cover. And Robert Jordan, of course, wrote the Wheel of Time series that went on forever and ever. In fact, when he was bringing out the first book in that series, he threatened, he told interviewers, I don't plan on this series having an ending. I plan on still being working on it when I'm dead. When they nail me into my coffin, I plan on still being writing these things. And he proved as good as his word. He died when his series was a long way off, many thousands of words off from being finished. And I am okay with the Wheel of Time series. It's nothing to write home about, but it's not bad. And the ending, the concluding novels that weren't written by Robert Jordan are very good. Nevertheless, that intent and the stating of it has been nothing but a bane to the writing world, especially to the fantasy world, ever since. Before that, if you started a fantasy series, it was at least implicitly incumbent on you that you knew what you were doing and were going to finish it, that it was a story instead of just a shaggy dog stemwinder. And Robert Jordan was one of the first authors to come right out and say, no, this is just what happened next. I don't plan on ever stopping doing this. And that has been, I would say, on balance, a bad thing for the genre instead of a good thing. Because you lose a lot as a writer when you are not expecting anymore to ever end your story. You lose a lot when you do that. You become absurd. That's why we laugh at soap operas, because there is no arc. There is no actual story. It's just one thing after another forever. I would like it. I'm glad, I'm encouraged by the fact that fantasy novels especially seem to be getting away from that. That would be great. But these were written before that. These were written when Robert Jordan still had to work for a living. So, and these aren't the only ones that he wrote either. Some of you may remember that the Robert Jordan Conan novels were collected in oversized trade paperbacks. I think they were called the Conan Chronicles, and there were 2 of them. So that'd be 6 books. So there are 3 Robert Jordan Conan novels that I don't have. But for now, I would say, and I think you'd probably agree, that for now, I have as many Conan pastiche novels as I need for the immediate time period. There were a few others. I have a plan in mind to acquire the rest of the Conan novels that I saw. We'll see if it works. But the rest of these things are not Conan novels. just in case some of you are morally deficient enough not to be interested in Conan the Barbarian. There's plenty of other stuff too. In fact, I mentioned on this channel that I a long time ago got the novels of Anthony Trollope in mass market paperbacks from Oxford World Classics. They reprinted all of Trollope's fiction in honor of his 100-year anniversary, and they also printed his autobiography in a nice little mass market paperback. And they got together a really good editorial crew for these things. The introductions, the notes, usually are first rate. And they did everything. They didn't just do the marquee novels. And I had all of those Oxford mass market paperbacks. I had them in this room. And somehow I decided to get rid of them. I decided you don't need all of these. I mean, I started that purge because I looked at my Oxford mass market paperbacks and realized that I had doubles and even triples of some things. Because I would encounter a couple of Trollope mass markets from Oxford at a used bookstore and not remember exactly what I needed and didn't need, so I just get them. And that ended up with lots of duplication. I started out that way, and then once I got rid of the doubles, I still kept going. And that was a mistake. Because even when Oxford has made new editions of these same books in trade paperback, which is, I admit, a paperback format that I kind of prefer, a lot of times the introductions and the notes weren't as good. I noticed. I would encounter that through need. I would look at something, I would encounter something in the text, and I would say, okay, I'm a little unclear on that. And I would look and there would be no note. Or the note would be worse. If I would compare it with the note for that same detail in the earlier edition of the same Oxford run, I would find that the note in the earlier one was better. Or I would encounter something in the text and I would be perfectly okay with it. Some classical allusion or the drop of a proper name. And I would be perfectly okay with it. And I would think, okay, well, I know what Trollope's referring to here, but I'm wondering what the endnote will say, because another reader is not going to know this. This is a reference to the Fairy Queen, for Pete's sake. Nobody knows the names of the Fairy Queen anymore, or H. Rider Haggard, or anything like that. So I would go back and I'd find no note at all. In the newer version, I'd find no note at all, so that a reader encountering that wouldn't have any idea what was being talked about. And then I would cross-reference it with the earlier edition of the same book by the same publisher and find that there was a note, a very helpful one. So I decided that, that was a mistake. That was a pruning too far. And that I would try to recollect those Oxford mass market Trollops. Right now, the Brattle Bookshop has a whole bunch of them. But a lot of them are discolored by age or dirt, and in a way that I don't think I could fix. So I have the heartache of seeing them and not getting them. But I found a few that are not like that. The first one being the Claverlings. This is an 1867 novel that is very, very. It's a standalone novel, and it's very, very good. It's very intense about a man who he doesn't get the woman that he first wants, and then he marries a virtuous, totally one of Trollope's classic, totally virtuous, totally uninspired women. And then the tempestuous and picaresque woman that got away from him, that married for money, she loses her husband and she comes back and she wants him again. And it's a very simple premise, but oh boy, does it work. Trollope just works it so well. I found that, and I also found John Caldegate, Trollope's bigamy novel. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And I love that old brooding Oxford World Classics cover. I think the Claverlings looks different when Oxford moved these to the yellow spine. I think they chose a different picture. But this is just fine by me. And the day that I am buying multiple Oxford mass market paperbacks because there are different old paintings on the cover is the day when I need to cry, stop. That is too much. But I got John Caldegate, and this is another standalone book, and it is also wonderful. And then we got one of Trollope's more slimy characters, just a delightful portrait of a slimy character. This is Cousin Henry by Anthony Trollope, and it was a perfectly chosen cover portrait because you look at that face and think, I don't trust him at all. And that's what this is about. This is about a young man who's going to be disinherited in the will, and realizes that he's the only one on the scene at a key moment, and he can change that. And the whole course of the novel is you wondering, what is he going to get his just desserts? We know what happened here. Is it going to get him? Because we don't like him at all. We don't have any sympathy for him. So I found those 3 Trollope novels, and they were 3 really good standalone novels, and that got me thinking on my way back here that we haven't talked about Trollope read-alongs this year. And that's bad. That's very, very bad. We should be doing Trollope read-alongs. So I have an idea that I wanted to float in front of you, my faithful Donoghue-gonauts, which is that we resume Trollope in 2020 reading standalone Trollopes. We did all of the Palliser novels last year. And I know that a lot of you were suggesting that we move on to Barsetshire, but what if we were to do standalone Trollopes in 2020? How would you feel about that? If you like that idea, then we could work up a schedule starting next month, starting in March, and just do one a month for the rest of the year except December. I'm not going to fall for that trap again, except for December. We do one a month, one standalone novel a month. Would you be up for that? If you would be, it being, early February, that would give you time to not only find a copy, although all of Trollope is free at Project Gutenberg, but also to read it, to read the book. Now, I know the standalone novel that I would like to start with, and it's huge. It's a chunker, but I never tire of reading it. I think I may have done a read-along for it on this channel already, and that's The Way We Live Now. But if we want to skip that, if we don't want to do The Way We Live Now, then we could pick one of these shorter ones. The Claverlings, or John Caldegate, or Cousin Henry, or Mr. Scarborough's Family, or The American Senator. They're all absolutely wonderful. I can guarantee you that, and they're all standalones. Although some of our familiar characters do occasionally walk on for just a bit, so we should think about that. That's worth thinking about. And then the next one that I got is a classic, and it's a Penguin classic. It's an actual classic, and it will replace a mass market paperback that I have buried on that Penguin Classic wall somewhere, because this was in perfect condition. It's as new as the day that it was made. And this is the Paul Foote translation of A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov, who was, that is our author right there. And he is one of the rare instances in Russian literary history of an author whose life actually does read more excitingly than any novel. The things that happened to him in his life, the things that he did right up to the end. He died in a duel. but all of it, the aristocratic upbringing, the fighting with the Tsar, the citations for bravery, the acts of physical bravery, and also the fact that he was come hither gorgeous. He was Byronically gorgeous, and cut a swath. And there's also that particular flair that happens in a lot of Russian literature, where you get the impression that writing immortal books was one of the last things on his mind. It's amazing. So many Russian classics seem to have been done with the left hand. They seem to have been done just as an afterthought. That, of course, is never true. That is never the case. But still, it's been a long time since I read this book. And I have a couple of big Russian classics coming up in 2020. So that's probably going to get me in the mood, and I wouldn't have passed up on this anyway because it's in perfect condition. It will replace a mass market paperback that's falling apart and held together by baling wire. Then this next one is galling. This was galling. The examples like this always are. I was watching a BookTube video. What was it? Who was it? I think it was. Pints and Paperbacks. I think I watched a video of his. I didn't go digging. I think the algorithm just suggested it to me, where he was pulling down books. He was probably doing a tag, and he showed a new trade paperback copy of The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer. Said he really liked it. I love it. I think it's one of the great works of 20th century American history, or 20th century history writing. And I was watching that video. I don't remember why, but I saw that and I thought, oh, yeah. I'm working up a new book on Poland during World War II. Poland, especially at the beginning, when the nation's lifeline was on the table, and then when Hitler invaded. And I thought, yeah, I spurred by that video, I'm going to go to my history shelf and pull down the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and read about Poland. Because Shirer's book is amazing. It's just amazing. It is so angry. It is such an angry book. And I did that and realized I don't have a copy. Of course, I don't have a copy. I had a big, nice, dust-jacketed hardcover, and I'm sure that I sent it to somebody. I'm sure I sent it to one of you. Probably right after I mentioned it in the history tour when we did a year ago. That I didn't have a copy of this book. Can you imagine? And I didn't have a copy of The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, an absolutely seminal work of history to have in your collection. And I made the usual mental notes. I thought for a minute, the kid on Pints and Paperbacks, I thought, well, that exact trade paperback, that new shiny trade paperback, is for sale at Barnes & Noble. And you get an employee discount, so it would probably be $10, $11, something like that. You could do that. And then I thought, well, there's a big, fat, squat UK trade paperback at Book Depository. It'd be a lot more money and you don't get an employee discount, but it'd be a form you'd really like. And then I thought, no. There have been, conservatively speaking, 6.5 million copies printed of the Decline and Fall of the Third Reich. You don't need to pay a huge amount of money for it at all. Wait until you find it free at a yard sale or for a penny or something like that. Don't in any way, don't even think about it. And so I put it out of my mind and just went on with my life, such as it is. And then I found a copy. Now, this is a trade paperback. It's a really somber thing. I like the gold on black. It's not the new trade paperback that I saw on Pints and Paperbacks, but it will certainly do. I will reinforce this, and this will be just fine. And it wasn't anything. I was buying these things on credit. So it's a perfect example of why I should always stop before I buy, because now I have this thing. I will read the pertinent parts, and who am I kidding? I'll probably read a lot more than that as well, because this is just such a great book. It is such a great book. And then the last thing I got was spurred by a new arrival that I got here on this channel that we've seen. The mystery author Elizabeth George has a new book coming out that's nonfiction. It's about the craft of writing mystery novels, and of writing just in general. And as is usually done with the most successful versions of those kinds of books, she is anchoring her ruminations on craft and theory and character building and whatnot on one of her books. James Michener did the same thing 50 years ago, she's anchoring on one of her books. So the axioms, the insights over a lifetime of being a best-selling author will apply just generally. But the book is Careless and Red, an Inspector Lindley mystery. And I read it when it first came out. It went in one ear and out the other. I don't usually miss one of her books, but it didn't make a huge impression on me at the time. And I saw her book, and it's coming up closer and closer on my docket, and I thought, oh well, that's interesting. I'll read it. I've read all kinds of novels by mystery or books by mystery authors on how they write their books, and the thought kept coming to me. Well, okay, but don't you need a copy of Careless in Red? I mean, if she's referring to that, the general reader might not need a copy, but if you're going to read this thing critically and then write about it, aren't you going to need to see if she follows her own advice, especially if she's anchoring it to one book? And I kept thinking, nah. I got Believing the Lie. I got one of my favorite novels of hers that wasn't Careless in Red. and I have a couple of her others, and I thought, no, that's good enough. That's fine. And I thought, what are you thinking? A general reader, maybe, but you cannot possibly read her book about Careless in Red without reading Careless in Red again and also following along with the points that she makes. So I got a copy of Careless in Red at the Brattle. This was, I think, outside for $1, so I didn't have to worry about it's not exorbitant expense of any kind. I will put this on the shelf with the new book and read them together. I remember this having some somber and effective moments. This is a novel that takes place right after Linley's wife has been murdered, and he has time off. He's gone to the coast because he has time off to grieve and to process his trauma and whatnot. And of course, being a character in a murder mystery series, he finds a dead body, and he is not in charge. He does not have the weight of the bureau behind him. Instead, he's just a witness. And as the characters point out relatively quickly, he's also a suspect. Because, well, sure, we know that he wouldn't kill somebody and drop their body in the surf, but other people don't know that at all. He's in the world of the novels. The police would be crazy not to suspect him. He himself would suspect himself. So I remember that there being a kind of a meta element involved there that I kind of liked. I will read this again and pay a lot more attention. I think the way to do it would probably be to read the advance copy of the new nonfiction book on writing mysteries that references this book nonstop, and then read this book and mull the two together in my mind, and then reread the craft book when I get the finished copy. I think that's probably the sequence in which I will do it. But there you go. That was another Brattle trip, which had contained many excesses. Of course, any Brattle trip contains excesses because I don't need any of these things. Even the William Shire, I don't need. But nevertheless, I got Careless in Red by Elizabeth George. I got The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich in a big trade paperback. I will reinforce this thing. I will also put its spine flat like that, the way it should be, and then pile some books on top of it, about 100 pounds of books on top of it, and leave it there overnight or for a couple of nights. And when I'm done with that, it will no longer do that. I found that the weight on top of that thing will straighten the spine, and then I'll just put it on a shelf so that nothing like that is happening. That is caulking. That is caulking that has caused that to happen. And I'm going to use caulking to defeat caulking. I'm going to re-caulk this book, as it were, by putting it in the right way, in the right shape, and then molding it with pressure back to stay in that shape. And then A Hero of Our Time in a trade paper, in a Penguin, so that will go right in this room, which is great. That's always a great feeling. And then 3 Trollopes. We have Cousin Henry. We have John Caldegate. And we have The Claverlings. Claverlings are a classic a classic Trollope novel with country houses and fox hunting and all that sort of stuff. And then a pile of Conan the Barbarian. We have Conan the Marauder. Conan the Bold. Conan the Savage. He's all of these things. He's all of these adjectives and more. Conan the Renegade. Conan the Relentless. He doesn't relent. Conan and the Gods of the Mountain. Let's see here. Conan the Magnificent with a beautiful cover. Some of these covers leave a little to be desired. Conan the Unconquered. He's not conquered. He's never going to be. And lastly, Conan the Victorious. There you go. So that was my Brattle trip. There's some serious history, some mysteries, some Trollope, and a bunch of Conan the Barbarian for pure fun. So that was a fun trip. I don't know how many more there'll be this week, but that one at least was wonderful. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.